You open this door with the key of reason. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of truth. A dimension of freedom. A dimension of joy. You're moving into the land of both the ideal and the real, of the possible and the actual. You've just crossed over into the Capitalist Corner.
Where reason meets reality, welcome to the Capitalist Corner.
Almost forgot the mic. Welcome to the Capitalist Corner, everybody. On this Monday, I'm Michael Liebowitz. I'm here all by myself. I've got a great interview out right now on the Michael Liebowitz Show with Mark and Joanne Skousen. They are the founders of Liberty Fest. Joanne Skousen, does an Anthem Film Festival dedicated to libertarian-oriented films. Mark is a prolific author. He has been named one of the top 20 most influential economists. Fantastic interview. Highly recommend. Check it out. And by the way, as you know, I love super stickers, super chats. If you can afford it, great. If not, you get the show for free. So I'm going to invert the order here a little bit of the description in the title of the show. I'm going to first talk about Lindsay Clancy and the rule of law. I'm hesitant to talk about this subject for a few reasons. One, it's ancillarily related to capitalism in terms of the rule of law, so I will tie it to that. Two, because there's a lot of people out there that are trying to keep followers, gain followers, make a name for themselves, etc., off of this case. I am not interested in being one of them. Oh, God. That said, I think there's a lot of important things involved with this case that I do want to discuss. But let me just say at the outset, I'm uncertain about a lot of things. I'm uncertain that insanity or the like should even be defenses allowed in a court of law. I'm uncertain that mental illness is even a coherent concept, despite the fact that I lost a debate to Jim Valiant on the subject. I'm not certain that, I don't know whether she's guilty, not guilty of the charges against her in terms of what the law is in her defense, etc. What I am certain of is that the rule of law is important, and far too many people express certainty over things that they have no business expressing certainty of. A little bit of my background that for some of you who may not know. I spent 25 years in prison. Going back to the age of 6, I was required to see therapists. When I went to high school, I was only allowed to go to school if I agreed to see a therapist. In prison, I regularly saw a therapist. I've been diagnosed with being socially, emotionally maladjusted, conduct disorder, PTSD, generalized anxiety disorder. I have an associate's degree in psychology. I completed a certificate program in psychology and social work. I completed an associate's degree in drug and alcohol counseling. No, sorry, not an associate's degree, a certificate program. I have an associate's degree in paralegal studies. I've read, aside from my degrees, extensively in both law and psychology, especially criminal psychology. With that, I'm still not certain about this case, but you have a lot of people out there that are expressing absolute certainty. Okay, so let me go through the law, because the law is very important. Now, I have Jim Valiant, hopefully, in the chat. He couldn't be here today, but he said he would be in the chat to correct me if I'm wrong regarding the law or to expand on what I say regarding the law. So I'm just going to read it from what I got here, from whatever it is, Claude. Elements of the charged offense: murder, either first degree or second degree, requires the Commonwealth to prove beyond a reasonable doubt an unlawful killing of a human being with malice, meaning intent to kill, intent to cause grievous bodily harm, or intent to do an act creating a plain and strong likelihood of death. First or second turns on aggravating factors like premeditation, extreme atrocity, cruelty, or felony murder, not an issue for the base elements. Okay. So with that, it seemed pretty clear to me, well, she's guilty, but not so fast. Because Massachusetts has a defense that differs from other states. They don't even have an insanity defense in Massachusetts. And you in Massachusetts can actually meet all the elements of an offense. But according to this case, the Commonwealth v. McCall, a defendant lacks criminal responsibility if, as a result of mental disease or defect, she lacked either the capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of her conduct or the ability to conform her behavior to the requirements of the law. It's a two-pronged cognitive or volitional test. Now, from, I don't know, a common sense perspective, people aren't accountable for what's not in their volitional control. As an absurd example, if somebody were to pick me up and throw me at Akira Felix and I landed on Akira Felix and broke his ribs, nobody would blame me because I wasn't the one that did it. I wasn't in control. In this type of case, the argument is that the person is not in volitional control. So it comes from the inside rather than the outside, but it's the same principle. So that's the argument. And furthermore, there's two structural points here. Once the lack of criminal responsibility is fairly raised through expert testimony, which this woman had, the burden shifts entirely to the Commonwealth. They then have to prove the criminal responsibility beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay. Few things. In a free society, the rule of law needs to be followed. It doesn't matter if I agree with the law or not. If it was duly enacted, it needs to be followed. So this is the law in Massachusetts. So whether or not I think it's good law, whether or not you think it's a good law, or everybody on the planet outside of the people that enacted it think it's good law, the fact is it's the law. Right? Why would we go against that? We ought not go against the rule of law. That's my point here. Now, there's a lot of people that seem to disregard this and just say she's evil, she's a monster. Now, how these people who have never had a conversation with this woman in their lives, who have no background in psychology or law, can come to these conclusions, well, I guess we can save that for a different day, or maybe we'll talk about it today. But the bottom line is it's the law. So what happens if the jury finds her guilty, or if we put her in prison despite what the law is? Then what happens the next time? What happens the next time? When are we allowed to not follow the law, and when are we allowed to simply do what we want? Now, I spent an awful lot of time here arguing that the war in Iran was unconstitutional and shouldn't have been entered into, because it violates the rule of law of a generally free society, right? So you have to follow the law. Now, there's people out there, there's an abundance of people on TikTok who are claiming things about evidence of all kinds of shit. The husband did it, whatever. These people are ridiculous. The woman admitted it. The prosecutor says she did it. She's not even raising that as a defense. So clearly, I mean, she's not innocent in that sense. But just to present the case a little bit, this is somebody who had previously told her family that she was having intrusive thoughts about harming her children. She was somebody diagnosed with depression. She was somebody that was seeing therapists, seeking out different medications, apparently trying to get help. She told people that she was perhaps suicidal. She indeed tried to kill herself by cutting her wrists and jumping off a building. She is now a paraplegic for life. Also, paraplegic. Also, It's not as if she's acquitted, she gets to go home. No, 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 no. She doesn't just go home. What happens is she goes to a psychiatric facility, and then they determine when and if she can ever go home. So there's a few other interesting sort of facts about this case that I want to. So the people that testified for her, right? There's a lot of people that came forward to help her out. So the medical experts that testified for her, or I'm going to skip that because it doesn't matter, but family members. Susan Clancy, her former mother-in-law, retired labor and delivery nurse who testified that Lindsay was a wonderful, loving, and very nurturing mother. Her own mother testified through tears that her daughter was an incredibly loving mother. Allison Osga's sister testified about Lindsay's declining mental state, noting Lindsay confided in her. Patrick Clancy has said that she has a severe mental illness, and he detailed her downward trend, says he has forgiven her. Colleagues, maternal health advocates, etc., are supporting her. There's also evidence on the other side that, she did ask her husband to leave the house. Now, that doesn't mean that she deliberately asked him to leave the house in order to kill the children, but she did ask the husband to leave the house. That is evidence, not proof. There's been claims that she was Googling how to kill the children. That's not true, but she was on the internet looking for ways to commit suicide. That's accurate as well. It's also true that prior to this, she had never claimed that she was hearing command voices or voices of any kind. There's no record of it anyways. Now she's claiming it. It's also true that she never previously said she was going to intentionally harm her children. She said she was having intrusive thoughts about it. Now there's an interesting thought. Those are the facts of this case. Matter of fact, let me just go through one more thing here. Let me see here. I think this is it because I want to make sure. All the people that she had told. Okay. Lindsay told her husband, her mother, her sister, all that she was having thoughts about harming her children. It was also well known that she expressed suicidal ideation. I mean, she's seeking help, but also the question has to arise why she was left alone with children. I think that's a valid point here. Now, let me get to my stance on the insanity defense. Now, I've opposed the insanity defense or anything like it for quite some time. I'm more on the fence about it now than I was in the past, but I'm still very, very skeptical. And let me tell you why. So Thomas Saz, of course, or Saz argues that there's no such thing as mental illness, that it's a category error. I'm not convinced he's wrong. So in 1980, a 34-year-old woman named Darlene June Cromer was tried in Oklahoma, California for the kidnapping and murder of a 5-year-old boy. The charge was first-degree murder with aggravated circumstances, the aggravating circumstances being racial motives for the killing. Cromer pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. The facts about the case were not in dispute. Okay. The prosecution argued Cromer's motive, as she herself claimed, was racial hatred. The assistant public defender disagreed. There is no question that the defendant did kill the little boy. However, this case does not involve racism. The defendant is insane. So the prosecution calls Saz. Saz doesn't even talk to the accused murderer. The reason Saz doesn't talk to the accused murderer, because Saz correctly says, talking to this woman now, no matter what my diagnosis of her, tells me nothing about what her state of mind was at the time of the offense. Nobody can know the state of mind her state of mind at the time of the offense. Now, if you apply that logic to this case, the husband testified that she seemed okay, but she was having a better day before he left. Does that rule out that she became psychotic? No. They've said that this stuff is intermittent. The point is, we have no way to know what was going on inside her mind at the time of the offense. And I really think it's dangerous in a society to release people who have committed heinous crimes based on the idea that their mental state was such and such at the time of the offense. Now, people may say, well, you have to judge intent at the time of the offense, but intent can be inferred based on actions. This stuff cannot. This type of stuff goes a lot. Well, maybe some of it can be surmised. I don't know that it can be inferred. So I'm very skeptical about it, about having this as a defense. That says nothing about what should be done in this case. And I don't know what should be done in this case because I haven't followed it that closely. What I do know is there are people that know her personally. There are psychologists and psychiatrists who have evaluated her. And there is a jury that is getting to hear the whole case. And all of them are in a better position to judge whether she satisfies the law to either be acquitted or found guilty than I do. I simply maintain that the law should be followed. Whatever result that is, the law should be followed. We ought not be making exceptions. That's my point of view. It's interesting that Massachusetts law relating to this is different than other states. Their sort of standard of proving mental defect or deficiency, the volitional thing, the other states, the federal law have long done away with that. But Massachusetts did not. We live in a federal republic. States get to make their own laws. This is the law in Massachusetts. We don't get to say, no, this woman did something heinous. She needs to go to jail regardless, even if the law doesn't say she does. I'm sorry, you can't do that. Well, I mean, you could. You ought not do that. Not if you want to have a free society. Okay, I want to go back now and just see some of the comments because I've been talking and I haven't been able to comment on them. So Rob Lankenheath says he watched the Skousen's interview this AM. It was terrific. Thank you. Greg Lewis says, how much does the mainstream media contribute to listeners taking on the trait of brazenly talking about things that the media preempted them on? I don't know. You know, I think about this type of thing as I'm scrolling through Facebook today. And for instance, Congresswoman Nancy Mace, she says, I had postpartum depression. It's not an excuse. Now, I mean, this is a congresswoman who ought to know better, but the way that she's experiencing postpartum depression it can be very different from the way somebody else experiences postpartum depression. So it's a ridiculous argument. You have a lot of people out there commenting on this. So could it be that they're really outraged, some of them, by this? You know, they just don't think about things, or they jump to conclusions. And I'm speaking of the people who are outraged who don't know, a lot of the facts. If somebody who does know and has studied it, that's a different story. I'll put that aside. But for the people on social media, they might just be very angry. And, when I was a kid, people would yell at the television when they'd get upset. These people now have the power to go on social media and yell. And I don't see how the dynamic is very different. You also have the situation where people are competing for fame. People want to be famous. People want to be rich. So they'll say things. They'll make a case like this. Their, what's the word I'm looking for? Their cause, is it cause celeb? Maybe. I don't know. But their cause that they want to fight, because it's going to get them the attention that they crave, especially if they're saying something controversial about it. There was another instance where a woman said that she feels very bad for the mother in this case. And somebody else comes on and says, yeah, I feel bad for the children, as if the two are mutually exclusive, which they're not. Regardless of what happens, this is a tragedy. It's an utter tragedy for everybody involved. So you can have compassion for everybody involved. Doesn't mean that the mother's earned compassion. Maybe she hasn't. That's not my point here. My point is only the two are not mutually exclusive. Let's see. James Valiant correctly says, prosecutor has burden to prove that she could control and morally understand. That's their law. Jim is correct. Akira Felix says, I'm more worried about this potentially inspiring politicians to go after drug companies. People are blaming it on her meds. That's like booze companies being guilty of drunk driving. So just so you know, I actually heard this on the radio the other day. I was listening to a local talk show, and the host wife was on, and she's blaming the drug companies. Look, they kept prescribing her this stuff. But what there was no mention of, and I was going to call in, but I was too busy, is did the drug companies violate the law? Did they even violate protocol? Did any psychologist violate protocol? Did they treat her recklessly, or did they treat her according to what the known best way to treat this stuff is? Because you can do everything right and things still go very, very wrong. You can't just say, I don't like the results, somebody has to pay for it. That's not the way it works. It's definitely not the way it should work. Diana says she was non-compliant with her medication. This is true, is that there were times she was non-compliant, but it's also true that she repeatedly sought help and repeatedly sought new medications. Some people have claimed this was doctor shopping. So depending on how you look at this, the angle, you can make the case. But what do the facts show? Regardless of whether we hold her accountable or they hold her accountable for the act, there's overwhelming evidence that this woman was mentally disturbed. There's overwhelming evidence that this woman sought help from the experts and from her family. That's undeniable. It's also undeniable that what she did was awful. It's also undeniable that she attempted to kill herself by slicing her own wrists and jumping off a building. So, yes, drug companies don't prescribe. If I said that, Greg, I apologize. I was incorrect and in haste. The doctor prescribes. But here's the thing. This is the way that I look at it. From my point of view, and this is a philosophical point of view, it has nothing to do with the current laws. If it were up to me, people could buy whatever the hell drugs they wanted. A doctor could recommend, of course, but nevertheless, you can do you should be able to do what you want. So Race Jacobson said, this is starting to remind me of the Chris Benoit tragedy. People argue about whether his mind was compromised by CTE, a common condition among wrestlers. The debate rages to this day. Yeah. I'm familiar with the case. The difference with this case is, in the Chris Benoit case, as far as I know, there was no evidence that he was seeking help for his condition prior to killing his family. And we also don't get to have his thoughts to tell us, what was going on. He also, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't have an abundance of people telling him what was, testifying on his behalf. Robert Naser says, why and how much should we care about this? Okay. The reasons that I care about this, as I stated at the beginning, is because there's two things involved in this case. Well, really three, but two that interest me very strongly. One is the rule of law. Too many people out there are quick to toss laws out because they disagree with them. Whether it were this war with Iran, I can't tell you the hell that I took for saying, no, it shouldn't be done. It's unconstitutional. But people don't, they wanted to go to war with Iran, so screw the Constitution. There's people that want laws against immigration. So whatever. You get rid of birthright citizenship, have the federal government deport everybody they don't like. Constitution be damned. President Trump wants to ban bump stocks, so he does it. To hell with the Constitution. And I think that's a big problem. And in regard to this case, I've seen people talking, saying, for instance, there shouldn't even be a trial. It's obvious. She admitted it. She should just be executed, that sort of thing. All which goes against the rule of law. The other thing, and this is an ongoing theme in my daily interest, it's people who talk about things of which they have no freaking clue. They just go out there and say things. They make assumptions. They say all kinds of stuff that's not true. Like, for instance, one girl on the internet said that this woman had Googled Googled how to kill children. It wasn't true. It was false, but she throws it out there. And so many people do that, especially within the influencer class. Because, it's a race. Who can get the most followers? Who can get the most clicks? Who can get the most likes? That's what's important. Not tragedy, not law, not philosophy, nothing. How quickly can I get people to comment? And then once they see it, what actually gets people's attention, that tends to speed it up. And I'm not saying that I'm immune from that. As I'm doing this episode here today, I'm like, should I even do this? And then should I hashtag Lindsay Clancy? That would get more views. Should I put it in the title? No, but if not, how will people know to watch it? So it's complicated, but people just run into that. I want this attention, so I'm going to do this. That really, really interests me. I had a conversation, well, not a conversation, but my friend Sheldon Richmond made a comment yesterday on X. For instance, this is kind of, it's related, and I'm going to show you why. So he made a comment on X about how when are limited government people ever going to present evidence that limited government can work? He's my friend, so I responded, and I said, when are anarchists ever going to, whatever? I don't even remember. It doesn't matter. Immediately, almost, people start coming in and posting their articles. Read this. The assumption being that I don't know the arguments that they're referring to. They just assume it. Oh, you must not know this. Otherwise, you would agree with me. They're jumping to conclusions rapidly. So somebody recommends to me that I read David Friedman. And so I joked around. I said, oh, who's that? Is he related to that guy that won the Nobel Prize? And the guy comes in and says, yeah, that he is related to him. And I said, look, dude. And I went through the list of the Murray Rothbard stuff I've read, Lysander Spooner, David Friedman. I referenced the debates I had, and I told them, it's okay that you don't know that I know this, but you ought not assume I don't. Why jump to the conclusion? And I think that's a big problem, Robert. I really do. I think that epistemologically, we're cooked as a culture because of a lot of things. And I think that social media, I'm not going to say it's to blame, but I certainly think it helps facilitate it because it creates an incentive to put that type of stuff out there. Thank you so much, Greg, for the $1.99 super sticker. Really appreciate that. Really appreciate it. Greg Lewis says, cafeteria style law. Take the laws you want and follow and advocate them, and the laws you don't like, disagree with impunity. Well, yeah. No, Massachusetts does not have the death penalty. Akira. So if anybody has any other thoughts on this topic, feel free to share them. I certainly would like to hear them. I think the epistemology is a very important topic. When Brent McCall and I were writing our book, Down the Rabbit Hole, How the Culture of Corrections Encourages Crime, we were talking about the criminal thinking errors. And one of the criminal thinking errors that was identified by Dr. Samanel and Dr. Yokelson was concrete thinking, that criminals are concrete bound. They do not think in principle. And Brent and I came to the conclusion, if this one error out of the 50 or 52 or whatever it was that they identified, if this one could be fixed, it would go a long way toward fixing the rest. Because once the person had the proper epistemology, they wouldn't be doing all these other things. And I think it's similar here, is if the epistemology is fixed, you don't end up with people wanting to violate the rule of law. You don't have the people jumping to the conclusions in the way that they do. And people wouldn't be so susceptible to the trickery that is online. Kira Felix says, Roy Childs should have written an essay about the problems with anarchy. I wish he did, but unfortunately he passed. Diana says she breaks the law traffically. Yes, Diddy, but that's not the rule of law is what the government does. Should the government be following and enforcing the laws? It has nothing to do with the traffic. Now, if you were caught and they just said, oh, we don't care because it's Diana, well, that'd be a different problem. Some would insist, Greg Lewis says, that if you were not pulled over for a traffic infraction, it didn't happen. I got to tell you, they've got these laws, these cameras now, and they put these signs up about, this area is monitored by traffic cameras or whatever. So, I mean, what ends up happening, I'm speeding and now I have to slow down quickly when I see what's happening. I see the law. Greg Doherty with a $1.99 super sticker. Thank you. Give that lady a get out of jail free card from Jim Valiant. Catherine Ellis. She's gone from Katie to Catherine. She says, I don't agree with the insanity plea because in my opinion, who doesn't know that killing anyone is wrong? That's still a choice made to do. It's knowing it's wrong. If I'm wrong in that, let me know. Well, I don't know how much to, well, let's just look at, oh God. So even in philosophy, there's plenty of things where people don't know that things are wrong and people disagree about whether something is right or wrong, right? People disagree all the time. And these are sane people who have their full component of rationality. It's not a stretch for me to imagine that somebody could be so deteriorated psychologically that they were incapable of appreciating right from wrong. Whether, whether people should be let off because of it is a different thing. I'm skeptical. But, there's some situations where I could say, okay, you know what, this person clearly wasn't in their right mind. At the same time, I've met a lot of people in prison, and a lot of them that I thought were nuts and didn't belong in prison. Upon getting to know them, however, I saw the underlying criminal characteristics beneath the mental illness. It's like on The Sopranos. I'm watching The Sopranos, and the guy, Tony Soprano goes to the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist, I think it was the ex-husband, but it might have been her own therapist, said, well, you understand that you could treat him and cure all his psychological problems, and underneath it is going to be the same sociopath. One last thing on the Lindsay Clancy thing. I've heard a lot of people referring to her as a sociopath, and I would just say, and Jim Valiant, back me up on this or disagree with me if you want, but first of all, sociopaths don't generally seek help. They don't want help. This woman was seeking help. Sociopaths generally don't tell their family members ahead of time that they're scared or that they're having intrusive thoughts about killing. It's just, that's not what sociopaths do. So I have a hard time believing that. So anyways, by the way, anybody joining us on X, this is the Capitalist Corner. It's a daily show, weekdays, noon Eastern time, 9 Pacific, where Mark Pellegrino and I, he's usually here, he's not today, we discuss the news of the day from a pro-reason, pro-freedom, pro-capitalist perspective. The show, The Capitalist Corner, is on the channel, The Rational Alternative, upon which we have numerous shows. We're doing a lot of good work. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers. We're at 976, 24 from 1,000. Please help us get there, folks. Help us get here. Jim Valiant says, yeah, not here. I don't know what the yeah, not here is referring to. Maybe he's saying, yeah, he wasn't here. Yeah, the law not here. Whatever. Either way, Jim, thank you. You are a, I don't know what I was going to say, great benefit to the show and a great benefit to me. So Trump has been threatening, and I guess Scott Besson, I think, is going to give a speech today. Maybe it was Scott Jennings. I don't know. I get them confused. It doesn't really matter. But they're talking about sanctioning Iran, about, oh, thanks, Jim, not sociopath, he says, economic sanctions. And these are going to utterly destroy Iran, they say. Now, I will say this. There's some evidence for this because the head of the parliament over there has given a speech. And in that speech, let me see if I can just find this real quickly. I got to scroll through what I sent Jim today. Okay, that's not it. That's not it. Oh, I think it's right here. Okay, let's see. Is this it? I hope so. Okay, well, first of all, the Iranian officials are saying that support for a new sanction would be an act of war, and anybody that gets in line with it is committing an act of war. That's the first thing. But then we also have this. The parliamentary speaker from Iran says, we are hungry, we cannot survive. He issued an unusually stark warning about the country's deepening economic troubles, declaring that even a powerful military cannot protect the Islamic Republic if its people are hungry and the economy continues to deteriorate. Perhaps then these economic sanctions, if they're going to be tough, will work. I'm not going to just dismiss them out of line, and say, oh, yeah, this isn't going to work. Maybe they will. But it kind of begs the question, too, about, well, maybe they would have worked before, but of course, maybe it's only in combination with the bombing. I ultimately don't know. We're going to see what happens with them. We'll see if Trump is going to go through with them. We'll see if he's going to stick to them. I'm skeptical, but I ultimately don't know the future. I suppose that we'll see. Then there's this other story, by the way. It's incredibly hot in this room I'm in. But anyways, there's this other story about deporting Iranians to Iran. While negotiations were taking place, I guess, during the bombing, when we bombed them the first time, and they sent people back there before we were going to bomb that country. We're claiming on one hand that country is too dangerous for its people, and then we're going to send people there. And then some of the people were even sent back at Iran's request, and somebody that wasn't even supposed to be sent was sent. I find it disturbing, troubling that the United States of America would be sending people back to a country that we know is barbaric. We know that they persecute people based on religion and sexuality, and we're going to send people there anyway, some at their request, and then we're going to bomb the country too. It just seems like a very not something that is consistent with being a beacon of liberty on the planet. Let me just put it that way. Let me think what else I want to talk about. So on last night's when I did okay, so yesterday I did this interview with Mark Skousen, and I wanted to interview him for a long time, and then he finally contacted me, and he does the Freedom Fest stuff, and it was a great discussion. He gave a warning. He thinks that the economy is headed for trouble due to debt, monetary inflation. He thinks we could be heading for a serious crash. We discussed the 2008 crash. It was interesting to me because when the market crashed in 2008, when the housing bubble, a lot of staff, I don't know about a lot, but some staff came to me because I used to argue with them about the economy, and they would say, what do you think about this? Look what capitalism caused. And Mark Skousen had written a great piece in the Christian Science Monitor about what actually caused it. And I had it ready, here you go. Just read this and tell me what you think, because it was well reasoned, based on facts. It was fantastic. He did a great job. I really enjoyed talking to him, and I got to ask him some questions. Like in like 2000 or so, Time magazine, I think it was, named John Maynard Keynes the most influential economist of the last 100 years, or the economist of the century, some such thing. So Mark wrote a piece that said, I like Hayek. And I told him, well, I like Mises. I said, do you stand by your Hayek? And he did. And I asked him if he stood by his conclusions in the book Vienna and Chicago, Friends or Foes. And he said he did, but he said on the trade cycle, the Austrians have it, that the Austrians were right. And he talks about how in Milton Friedman's book, he wrote with Anna Schwartz, The Monetary History of the United States from whatever date to 1960. But in a new piece that came out right before, after Milton's death, but right before the crash, and she basically said that there's nothing wrong with the economy. It looks stable. And then, of course, it crashed. And during the Great Depression, Irving Fisher, the founder of monetarism, said... thanks, Gary. I'll get that in a second. Irving Fisher thought the economy was doing fine. John Maynard Keynes saw a boom as far as the eye could see, while Mises and Hayek predicted the Great Depression. Gary Menard, thank you so much for the $4.99. He says, as missed as Mark is, your solo shows hold an audience interest just as well. Thanks, Gary. I appreciate that. That's very nice of you. I don't know how much I want to get into this inside baseball crap, but there's some folks who are very much opposed to Ludwig von Mises and the Austrian school. Jim Valiant says he loves Mises to pieces, as do I. I think, in my view, probably the greatest economist of all time. But some in the objectivist camp, they don't like Mises's talk of a priori, or a priori, however you want to say it. They don't like his talk of subjective value. So they throw out the proverbial baby with the bathwater. Look, the guy made errors. So has virtually every human being that's ever lived has made some errors. Ultimately, he was entirely brilliant. His economic analysis was superb. His critique of positivism was accurate. His identification of how prices are formed, fantastic. His demonstration that socialism can't work, superb. Trade cycle analysis, my God. Mises was fantastic, and I recommend him 100 times out of 100. Let's see what Robert Naser has to say here with a $10 super chat. He says, good news. The audiobook version of Quentin Cordaire's latest novel, The Fruit of the Tree, narrated by yours truly, was just completed and will be available within a week or so. Robert, make sure once it's available, get me that link. Get me the link and I will share it to my various social media platforms. All right, let me hide current comment. All right. Any questions? You guys got to help facilitate the discussion. I'm here alone. No Mark Pellegrino. Love the audience, but the audience needs to help. Ian Gilmore says, hopefully Robert was paid enough for the audiobook to cover his super chats. Race Jacobson says, I don't really have hang-ups about the Austrians. I just think we have to improve upon what they did, just as they improved upon classical economics. Sure. The way to improve upon them, though, is not to... Should I get myself in trouble, Jim? Well, why not? There's a tendency amongst some objectivists to want to make everything fit into an objectivist framework. Now, if objectivism is right, you don't have to do that because the reality will fit. But they want to change the subjective valuation of the Austrian school and make everything objective. It's all objective. George Reisman wanted to rehabilitate the cost of production theory of value, for instance. Even Ayn Rand in her essay on what is capitalism came up with this idea of socially objective value, which for an individualist I thought was a bit meh. And the bottom line is objective values have very little to do with prices in an economy, right? So you can show that something is absolutely harmful to human beings. It's an absolute disvalue in that regard. If people are going to buy it, its price is going up. That's what's relevant in the study of economics. Not what I should value, what I actually value. Not what is actually good for me, but what I decide to spend my money on. How people spend their money in economics is what in markets is what determines prices. And the way that entrepreneurs are able to estimate where demand is headed is by looking at the relative prices, because then they understand what people want, what people don't want. Jim says there is a valid use of the concept subjective. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed, James. Jim the Blasphemer. James Valiant is a good enough name, but he could be James the Blasphemer. That would be awesome. All right, so we've got about 15 minutes left that I can't fill. I mean, I can sit here and try to entertain you with my good looks and my speculation. I got to go to the skin doctor. Does anybody else ever had this experience? Let me tell you about this. So I got to go to the skin doctor. And they called me this morning for make an appointment. And I said, okay, I'm thinking I'll tell them I can go this afternoon. They tell me, okay, we're open on October 5th. October 5th. Jesus. Okay, I guess I'll have to go on October 5th. Get the eye looked at, see what's happening, see if I've got any trouble. All right, folks, look, I'm going to wrap this up. I have nothing more to say. I've spoken what I need to. I've said what I wanted to. I did just recently get a pedicure, Race, and I actually had a Seinfeldian moment when I went. So I go to get the pedicure. I walk in, and there's about 10 women giving pedicures at this place. And I get in there, and I make my appointment, and I'm sitting there waiting. And all of a sudden, this guy comes over, and he's like, sit right over there. And I'm like, oh, man. The guy's going to do my feet. Now, look, I don't know. I don't want a guy fiddling around with my feet. I'm sorry. I just don't. I don't want men touching my feet, doing things with my feet. I just would have preferred you. At all these women, I'd prefer the woman give me the pedicure. Thankfully for me, it was actually a woman. The guy was just directing me where to sit, but it was a woman that did it, and I was very, very pleased about that. Let's see. There was a question here. He says, Ian Gilmore says, I assume you've read Rob Tarr's article comparing Austrian ideas of value and Rand's. I have not. I'm going to go look for it, though. Hopefully I can find it. All right, everybody. I'm going to bounce now. Remember, this... Oh, wait, no. Whoa. Liebowitz, put on the damn brakes, sir. We've got to address some questions from the other day. Let's see what we got here. The other day, my question concerned what was funniest, Friends, Seinfeld, or Curb Your Enthusiasm? Let's see. Wrong one. This is the right one. Okay, so Hazardous 3 says Friends. Greg Doherty says Seinfeld. Ian Gilmore said Seinfeld is the funniest. Friends is fine. He does not like Curb Your Enthusiasm because of the cringe humor. Not Another Guitar Channel says Seinfeld is good whether you pay full attention or not. Friends is only good when you're not paying attention. And Curb is only good when you're paying full attention. And Christopher Smith says Seinfeld, but it's contextual. Thank you all for answering the questions. That's great. Okay, what is my capitalist thought of the day? Well, we started this show talking about the rule of law. So let's do a capitalist thought of the day based on the rule of law. So even amongst rational people, disagreements can arise. Even in a free society, disagreements can arise. Even among people with the same values and same philosophy, disagreements can arise. They can arise over what laws should be implemented. Let's take a simple example. I'm personally pro-choice. I think pro-choice is the right decision. I, however, could see how somebody who shares my philosophy could come to a conclusion that abortion is wrong. I think they would be wrong. But let's just say that we have a full society that's implemented according to my wishes, right? I mean, according to the backdrop, we've got the Constitution, we've got full capitalism. But there's abortion becomes illegal. I don't even, this is going to make me sad to say, but you ultimately would have to ban it, and that would be it. And you have to fight to get it legalized. Now, I'm assuming a country where, broadly, like I said, we broadly agree. Or take LSD. Let's take LSD, for instance. There's some people who would argue, as I would, that LSD should be legal for everybody to do. There are arguments, though, that it so distorts people's minds that it's not safe for them to use in regard to other people, so it's not only about them. So suppose we had a full capitalist society, but LSD was outlawed and somebody gets caught selling LSD. I would say, yes, the person needs to be prosecuted. It's the rule of law, even though I disagree with the law. So there's a lot of situations in which people can differ. But you have to uphold the rule of law, because the opposite of the rule of law, what you end up is creating a system whereby some people get to arbitrarily decide. So the law is this, the judge says no, you go free or you go to jail. And remember, if a judge can violate the law to send you free, he can violate the law to send you to prison. That's all I have to say about the subject. It was clunky. That was clunky. You know what? I tripped myself up, I'm going to be honest, because I touted the rule of law, but then I gave I violated Leonard Peikoff's rule. I gave too controversial an example, in that of abortion. And I thought to myself, I don't even want to say that you should arrest somebody for getting an abortion or outlaw abortion. I just didn't want to say it. It was grating against me. But either way, I do support the rule of law, and I support you guys. So the question of the day is, it's going to pertain to the rule of law. Should the rule of law be upheld in a free society, even if you disagree with the law? That's what I want to know. If you disagree with the law, should it nevertheless be upheld in a free society? That's what I want to know. All right, guys. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you tomorrow, same time, same place. And remember, anybody that's joined us from X, the channel's The Rational Alternative. On YouTube, the show is The Capitalist Corner. In honor of the great Mark Pellegrino, I will advise you to always check your premises. Peace.